All right, completing the square again, including fractions. So the process is no different. You're just kind of forced to work with some fractions here. So again, we're going to look at these first two terms. So we're going to factor out this first coefficient out of the first two terms. So I'm going to factor out a negative 1/2. Remember, we are dividing here. So if I take a positive 3 and I divide it by negative 1/2, well, dividing by a negative 1/2 is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal of this. So dividing by a negative 1/2 is really the same as multiplying by a negative 2. So this value would become negative 6x. I'm going to leave a space and have my 4 just hanging out over here. My next step is I'm going to look at this middle term. I want to create a perfect square trinomial here. So I'm going to take a negative 6. I'm going to divide it by 2, which would be a negative 3. A negative 3 squared gives me a positive 9. So what you should notice with completing this square, this value inside this set of brackets is always a positive value. Because whether you're squaring a positive or a negative, you will always end up with a positive. All right, so now that we've done that, now we need to balance this equation out. So technically I haven't added 9. Technically I've added 9 negative 1/2 times. So I'm going to multiply these values, which is negative 9 over 2. The balance of that would be a positive 9 over 2. Or if you want to write it as a decimal, 4.5 is just fine. All right, so now you are ready to factor that perfect square trinomial. And so instead of factoring this, I'm just going to quickly use my shortcut. I'm going to square this first term, which is x. I'm going to take the sine of my second term, which is a minus. I'm going to square this last term, which is a 3, and then that should just be all squared. And then I'm going to collect these values here. So 4 and 4.5 would be 8.5, or as a fraction, 17 over 2. If you left this as 8.5, would be just fine. It doesn't matter. All right, so now let's just give ourselves a quick sketch of this. My vertex would be 3, 8.5, or 17 over 2. And my graph opens down, and my a value is smaller than 1, so it's a fairly wide graph. Okay, it's just a sketch, doesn't have to be absolutely accurate. So that is how you complete the square.